So welcome to Launch Stories. We're all about connecting and educating entrepreneurs, and I appreciate you all coming out for our first session of 2024. Thanks to our sponsors for helping us with these monthly events, Chilliwack Economic Partners and the Chilliwack Innovation Network. And thanks to Stalo Community Futures through a grant from CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, for being a sponsor this year. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Shannon. And special thanks to our partners for organizing Launch Stories every month. My chief recruiter for speakers, Colin, is in the audience from Zynon Ventures and Cowork Chilliwack and Currency Marketing. And a special thank you to Elise McAlpine for running all the AV equipment and recording the show tonight. Thank you, Elise. I am thrilled to introduce our guest this evening. He is the founder and partner of the innovation studio, Conexkt. Please give a warm Launch Stories welcome to Johann Roduit.
Hello, hello.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for coming.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
And I asked you a number of times to rehearse, and I think I defaulted back. How do you say your last name again?
Johann Roduit.
Roduit.
That's all right. It's French, yes. So it's
fair enough.
Might be difficult.
So before we dive in, can you give us an elevator pitch on what your company does?
Yeah, for sure. So my company Conexkt, what we do, we help C-executive to innovate. And by that, I mean, we help them, a lot of C-level executive, they have a lot of ideas. Sometimes they're like team, resources, finances, and time to do what they have in their drawers of full of ideas because they have the day-to-day basis. So what do? We come with our team and we help them to be like, hey, this might be a great idea that you have, and we can help you to go from an idea to design to prototype and to then launch it. And it might be founding another company, launching a new product. So a lot of variety of things from design to strategy to implementation.
Interesting, and we'll get to the real details of that, but that gives some context for what you're doing, and we'll discuss how you got here. And so, obviously, you don't have a traditional Canadian accent. You grew up in...
I'm trying.
No, you're very good, but Valais, Switzerland.
Yes.
So I got up Google Maps and realized, okay, it's in the south of Switzerland, but that's all I know at this point.
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's the French-speaking part of Switzerland. It's maybe the main hub, Geneva and Zurich. So it's like 2.5 hours from Geneva, right in the mountains. The mountains are right there. Beautiful valley, and it's also a little bit, maybe some connection with the Fraser Valley here. It's also like it's not the main hub, but there's huge potential for innovation and entrepreneurs. And often the problem is like we always look towards the main hub. We always look toward Vancouver to San Francisco, and we're like, oh, well, wait a minute, maybe we can do things here too. So this is where I grew up. Similar, I think, in those ways with Fraser Valley.
And I may have a stereotypical impression, but did you learn to walk or ski first?
That's a good question. I think, did you learn to ice skate first here in Canada? Probably similar, right?
Fair enough.
Probably similar answer.
Yeah. And to this day, do you ski or do you snowboard?
I do both, yeah.
Okay.
I grew up skiing, then moved to snowboarding. And now I think I'm probably want to try to ski again, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So most of your career to date has been in academia. But I'm curious, were there any entrepreneurial influences early on in your family or your circle of those in the community?
Yeah, so I worked in academia for many years and then have been influenced by entrepreneurial figure. One side of my family is more, let's say, teachers. They have a lot of high school teacher, high school director, and so on. And then my other side is entrepreneurs. My grandpa founded a company. Oh, there you go. There he is.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect timing. It looks like it was rehearsed. Perfect timing. Yeah. So he started a company selling fruit and veggies. He would take them from the valley and and send it to the market in a big city. Be similar to fruit and veggies from the Fraser Valley. You go and sell it in Vancouver. But that was in the Swiss context. And yeah, entrepreneur, and he founded a company, then his sons had a company, and now he's the grandson, and now the great-great-grandchildren are now owning the company. I don't know. I think the grandchildren are some of the owners, and the great-grandchildren are getting there, right? So it's like 4-generation company. So lots of entrepreneurial influence from that side of the family, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I read through your bio website, your corporate website, and your LinkedIn, and a lot of it is quite abstract. So I thought I would jump kind of directly to the main crux of your expertise. And so in 2014, you did your PhD defense for ethics of human enhancement.
Yeah, that's right.
Give us the condensed executive summary of this research paper and so forth.
Yeah, so ethics is just looking at kind of what is right, what is wrong, what is the right thing to do in given context. And I work here in the Faculty of Medicine. So in medicine, there's a lot of ethical question. A lot of it has to do with new technologies. And I worked in the ethics of new technology, like called human enhancement. It could go from like just using Ritalin for people that don't have any disabilities. You just want to take a drug to help you learn better. Is that a good thing to do? Is that a wrong thing to do? How should we think about those things? And a more extreme side could be like using artificial limbs or to replace what is considered natural, because the artificial is becoming better and better. And then so the end of that type of thought will be a thought of like cyborg, transhumanism type of thought. And I looked at the ethics, of enhancement and dived into this for, I think 4 or 5 years at the University of Zurich, and then published the PhD.
Did you come up with any personal conclusions of where you stand on where is that line, or is it ever moving?
You always end up with more questions the more you study. And I think I looked at it, and it's an ongoing discussion about, for me, deep down is what does it mean to be human in a time or where technological advances keep shifting and changing, and what does that mean? That core element, is there a core element of us of being human? Is it worth preserving or not, or should we move to transhumanist thought or post-humanist thought? And how do we deal with it? So I don't have all the answers, but just the thought process of this. And I think deep down is to avoid dehumanization. A lot of tech could bring that, whatever that means, right? But there's a sense of some tech can not be the best that we can have for us as human, personally, and as a species. So to just think of those things,
And I think a lot of this is becoming more in the mainstream zeitgeist of what we're talking about, and especially with the introduction of more public-facing AI and so forth. I remember being at a talk where Ray Kurzweil, who's one of the early thinkers around the singularity, and he has the Singularity University, worked for Google, and he mentioned that this isn't really new. We've been augmenting human, like eyeglasses, for example, or even a ladder is a way that humans have extended their reach and so forth. And so I guess it's all just on a continuum. But do you see a day where, I know there's some talk about like athletes that have blades, for example, might be able to run faster than someone in a 100-meter run. Do you see when someone will say, well, I'm going to cut my own legs off and replace them?
Well, it's actually a case. I've read about it in the UK. There was a young athlete. She had one prosthetic limb, and then her biological limb was making her slower. And she asked to have the natural limb, the biological limb, to be cut off and replaced. It was refused by an ethical board for now. I mean, that was a case like I think 10 years ago. So I haven't followed up, and I could see that. That might appeal to some people. Yeah.
And so we're digging into this, and I think that'll be some of the context as we go through. That is the backdrop, and a lot of thinking, obviously, around that. You had sent a number of great resources, and this one, I transcribed this, and I'll read it. This was from the Vancouver Son, and Hope for the Future. After years of suffering life-threatening epileptic seizures, Sophie has hope for the future. In 2017, she became the first patient in Canada to have a cutting-edge device implanted deep in her brain to suppress her seizures before they happen. And so talk to me about that just seems like, pardon the pun, a no-brainer to say, we should do that. But what are the ethical implications of a decision like that to allow someone to do that?
Yeah, so just some of the background here. So UBC, the Center of Neuroethics that think about the ethics of the brain came to us, and they're like, we have a lot of research on the ethics around epilepsy and seizure. We'd like to communicate it. What should we do? So our company took them through a design process. We defined it that we should do a documentary, and then we helped produce the documentary. And then we had like a premiere, and it was shown, and then the result was also shared with the Vancouver Son. And it was at the intersection of my work, ethics and tech, and then science communication. So yeah, that was some of the results. And everything that has to do with the brain, there's a lot of ethical question. And then it's brain of children. So lots of questions about what should we do, what shouldn't we do. And here there's a lot of question about access to healthcare. In that case, she had to go to the US to get treatment. She couldn't do it in Canada. So resources, so that's a big one. And then where does that lead? You know, like when you drill your brain, like what can be the danger? So yeah, so that was very rewarding work for our company with UBC. Yeah,
and we see a lot of good news like this, but I imagine on the flip side, some implants might not work and may cause death potentially, right?
Yeah, some implant, and it's private companies. Some implant might not work.
Right.
Sometimes they might oversell it. Sometimes what if the company then goes bankrupt and you still have their implant in your brain? Like, what is happening there? Like, there's no updates.
Right.
What do you do? So it's a very promising field, but there's a lot of ethical question. And the team at UBC have, I think, some of the world leading expert, Dr. Judy Illes at the Neuroethics Center, and she's thinking hard of those questions and want to make sure to share them with the public.
Right.
So it was a great initiative from her.
Speaking of potentially overselling it, I put a slide in here for Neurolink. So I think you've thought a lot about this, and that kind of Silicon Valley ethos of what is it from Facebook? Work fast and
work fast and break things.
And break things.
Yeah,
That's
break things.
probably not a good thesis for when you're dealing with this. And you go to the website, actually, you scroll to the bottom, it's not contact us, it's sign up as a potential candidate. Like that's what they're recruiting right now.
But I think there's a lot of guidelines, and in the US, probably you can't just. So that company must have gone through. I haven't followed closely because I'm not in academia anymore. I mean, I know now they can test it on humans, but before you can do that, there's so much hoops you have to go through in order to test on humans. Although that being said, there's a lot of biohackers that they're like, oh, forget this. I'm going to try it on my own body. And I'm an autonomous being. I'm an adult. I can just do what I want. So there's also those questions, right, of biohacking, of someone trying on their own.
It does seem to have a lot of intersection with science fiction. Like it's been said that a lot of innovation comes from the creative minds of somebody that wrote a book, and then we fill in that tech. Do you feel like everything is kind of colliding towards that, this transhumanism? And
I think science fiction can help us think through those things in some way, but science fiction is a reflection of our future. It's not necessarily like a reflection of our present. It's not necessarily about the future, but it's really like how we think about things today. But often I feel it might be a scapegoat too. We're like, oh, this is science fiction. We want to think about this. Like when we think of AI and AGI, artificial general intelligence, it pushes us to think of almost a futuristic debate, and we forget to think about what is here and now. We have problem of access to resources, inequalities. Some people don't have basic health care, and then we're like, oh, but in science fiction we do this, and then it avoid the really important topic that is here right now for a lot of people. It's just basic access to basic health care. So how we can solve this? It's nice to think about, oh, we can live forever in a whatever form with a brain and computer interaction, sure, but also like what are we doing for people that are suffering here and now? Yeah,
there is almost creates a wider economic divide, especially when you're talking about those that can afford to do it if it's not covered and so forth. And so let's step through some of your other academic work. So your thesis or your PhD you published it as a book. I found this on Amazon.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a PhD thesis. It's not, I mean, I don't want to oversell it here.
Right.
Don't buy it for your friend for Christmas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the advice. But during that time, you worked at the University of Zurich as the managing director of the Center of Medical Humanities. Tell me about that time and what was your role? What did you do from a day-to-day standpoint?
Yeah, so I was managing a center. It was a new center, and the idea was to use the humanities in general and say, like, how can the humanities help us inform or help medicine? So it can go through like film. How can film help inform medicine? It could like educate future doctors. Poetry, how can that inform medicine? All of the field of humanities, theater, even we had reflection about sports and stuff like this. How can all those field, how does it work at the intersection of medicine and humanities? So I was just leading some of the activities of the center, some administration, some science communication, grant application, lots of writing, and then empowering other researchers for there to do the hard work.
That seems like I'm not familiar with other centers for medical humanities. Is that commonplace at universities, or was that pretty new when the University of Zurich started this?
I think it's becoming kind of commonplace to I mean, because medicine, some people, it's the question, is medicine science or an art?
Right.
And then people are like, well, yeah, so they want to use that art part of it to inform medicine. Yeah. And medicine has become so technological that some people feel they lose connection with the humanities and arts and stuff like this. So that's why. But I think there will be such center in most universities, in big universities, yeah.
The term used in medicine that's always bothered me is practice.
Oh, yeah? Why?
Because I want someone who's doing something on me to be on the practice phase. I want them to be an expert. It just, the double meaning of that has always been...
We're going to practice on you today.
Exactly.
What can we drill in your brain?
So from there, you went to the Collegium. You gave me a bunch of tongue twisters. Collegium Helveticum.
Yeah, Helveticum. Helvetia is the Latin name for Switzerland.
Got it.
So that's an interdisciplinary center at there's the University of Zurich. There's ETH is a technical university. It's like the MIT of Switzerland, and then an art school. And here, I was working as a senior researcher, and that I started doing a lot of work on AI. And the question I was asking was, what is the moral implication if we outsource our moral thinking to a machine? So where I have to make any decision, moral decision, whether it's moral decision can be like the end of life, the beginning of life, all through your life you have moral decision. And often, I think us as a species, we're lazy, so we just want to outsource all those thinking to other people, or it might be political figure, religious figure, all sorts of figure that do the work, and then they tell us what to do. And then I was like, well, what if we replace this people by a machine? And we used some tests. There was with GPT-2, but GPT-2 wasn't what it is now. So nobody kind of cared. They're like, oh yeah, it's maybe, but the thought experiment was there. And now after ChatGPT, everybody's like, oh wow, this is interesting. We should think about those things. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is jumping way ahead because I think this next slide is quite recent, but it jumps off of that talk around AI. And this was an experiment that got you some headlines. And so I did a Google Translate. My French isn't the best, but it says how a virtual professor teaches history to students in Valais.
Yeah, so this is another project and another client. There was a high school in Switzerland. They saw some of the work and the experiment we've done around AI, and we've been working with AI, but we never really advertised AI like it was just a tool, right? It's like you don't advertise like, hey, I can work with Microsoft Word. Like no one will care. So we just like AI was there, but then we just released some of the pilots we've tried. We've tried to do like a podcast entirely automatized with all the experts and all the things was all scripted by AI and the voices and all those things. And then that high school director was super interested, and he's like, well, could you guys use an avatar and give the lectures? And we're like, yeah, we can surely do that. And there was few reasons why he wanted to do this. One was that most of his teacher during the pandemic had to go in front of the camera, record their teaching, but no one liked it. And it was so time consuming. And if you're a teacher in high school, you're very conscious about your image being shared on a video to students. Teenager might sometimes don't have the best intentions. So they were kind of concerned about the misuse of their images. Time consuming because as a high school teacher, you want to make sure you don't make any mistake. So there was a lot of pause and redoing it. And the price of video production is very high. So the high school teacher is like, well, could we use an avatar to help the teachers? And people are like, well, you want to replace the teacher and all of this. That wasn't the case at all. It is to help the teacher that don't want to do that sort of job, and to help the student. And you can see the production quality from, you can imagine someone in their home studio recording themselves, the lectures, compared to like something with an avatar. There's no mistake. You can update it easily. And then you can use GPT to feed with the data. We use the data from the Swiss high school. And we make sure we limited the data for this. And yeah, the results were very good. The students loved it. They use it to learn more and more. And we keep working now. We accompany that high school. I kind of like AI consultant for probably like a longer period now. And it made the headlines. It was kind of cool. Like, our avatar was just above the Swiss president meeting the French president. We were like, yes.
And so it sounds like it was a bit of an experiment, and you did implement it. Is it still ongoing and rolling out new lessons that are being done in it, or was it just sort of a contained experiment?
Yeah, so we did first lesson on the French Revolution. So now I'm like, know so much about the French Revolution. And then physics. They wanted to test physics because physics is hard. To also to visualize it and to make sure students will be excited about it and learn about it. So we're now continuing with physics and try to implement a little bit more other AI tools too. We actually talked to that client yesterday and sending a new offer for this to continue. We also work with the Association of Private High School in BC. We did one pilot with them too. They're testing with a lot of high schools. It's to help. Usually they will have a teacher that have to like travel to Kamloops for 1 hour lecture, then have to travel to Kelowna for another hour lecture, and northern BC, and the same lecture every year. That you sometimes in work you have to go through some guidelines. There's a lot of cost just to send people there, and they're like, well, let's test with an avatar, and now we're waiting for the result. So I think it is, and we'll definitely keep testing and keep working on it, and have constant feedback from the user, which is super helpful.
You touched on it a little bit, the notion that all of these new tools will displace workers. But it seems like most technology and new products that come along don't necessarily, they create new jobs, or they get rid of mundane tasks. You're talking about the act of like recording yourself and so forth. And what's been your experience with that, being so on the bleeding edge of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of studies, I think, are saying, the workforce is going to shift. I mean, it is shifting. There's no question about this. And yeah, maybe we could work less. Maybe work is not that important. Maybe there's other value that's important in life. So we could redefine those things. So, and I'm okay with the idea of every mundane tasks, or not even non-mundane tasks, like things you don't want to do, right? If you can have a machine that does it better than you, like why not? But then, this is the question of so many people, workforce. If they cannot work, what are we going to do? So those things. I mean, people are thinking hard about those things, and but a relationship with work might change, but I don't think in itself is a bad thing. Yeah.
So in 2014, you took on doing a TEDx in Martigny.
Yes, that's right.
Why? What intrigued you about the TED ideas we're spreading?
Yeah, so when I was studying, I watched TED conferences, and then I was studying at the University of Zurich, and I saw there was TEDx Zurich, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool! It's TEDx Zurich." So I went there, and then I didn't know that there's a distinction between TED and TEDx. You guys know TED,
Yep.
TED, the big TED in Vancouver once a year. TEDx Chilliwack, TEDxAbbotsford, TEDxMartigny are smaller, independently organized. I didn't know at the time. I thought I was going to the real TED. I'm like, yes, that's very cool. And then I learned there. I was like, oh, no, you can apply for a license. So the night I went back home, I'm like, let's apply for a license. Where should we do this? I was living in Zurich, but my hometown, I grew up in Martigny. I was like, let's go and do there. And then, applied and then recruited some of my friends that were kind of excited about having a TEDx. And then we did it. We did it all. So that's like pre-COVID, 10, 11 years ago. We did it all. We planned everything remotely on Google Docs. And people were like, how did you do this? You didn't meet in person. We were all like spread out in Switzerland, and it worked really well. So it was kind of a very fun time.
And was that a one-off, or have you done more than one with Martini?
Oh, I think I was the license holder like for 4 or 5, and they keep doing it. Yeah, there's a
Nice.
new members. They did TEDx Youth. And I think they're now at the 11th edition, and it still seems to be going very strong.
And what's the population of Martini?
It's like 15,000 people.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's very small. And there's like 400 people that go every year.
So pretty much everybody will have done a TED Talk by the time.
I mean, we invite people from elsewhere too. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But it's great. It's a great way to connect with the community.
And you've had a number of interactions with Canada along the way. You did some study here with UBC. What time frame was that?
Well, this will be like 2010, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at that time, you met your wife?
Yeah, I met my wife. That's why Abbotsford.
Got
People
it.
ask me why Abbotsford. Well, because of love.
Yeah.
I met my wife when I was doing some studies here, and then we moved to Zurich for many years, and then decided to come back. Yeah.
And then you returned in 2015 and 16 to do some more study with the University of Calgary.
Yeah, so that was a postdoctoral work at the University of Calgary. It worked super well because it was an opportunity to go back to Canada, and we had family south of Calgary too. So very practical. And then did work on enhancement. So again, ethics and tech and science fiction with a professor there at the University of Calgary. So again, it's always that space about ethics and tech.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you did send a photo of yourself in front of the Matterhorn. I have a picture in front of the Matterhorn, but it's at Disneyland,
nice.
right?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I was going to say that still count, but I don't think it does.
No.
Yeah. You got to go see the real one.
Where is this in low relation to where you grew up? Is it quite a ways away, or is that?
It's like 2.5 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
because
so
that's
it's-
definitely a famous mountain for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty close. And you have to make sure that when you go, it's a sunny day. We've been there with some Canadian family, and they're like, and then it's covered in with the clouds, and you're like, oh man, that's too bad. It is beautiful. Look at the photo. Yeah.
I'm curious about your jump from academia to entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
I would imagine that academia is slow moving, you're applying for grants, you're getting funding. How does that relate, and why did you end up making a move and founding a company?
Yeah, so in academia, I always like to communicate some of the work, like on enhancement. So we did project, science communication project. We did arts project in the role of enhancement. We did like comic books, a lot of projects that were not part of academia per se, of just research. TEDx, science cafes, a lot of things. And then those projects were getting a lot of other project. And then I thought like, maybe we should have an umbrella and create a company that can manage those projects and make sure they're sustainable. So that's kind of how the transition came. And then we had, on a very practical basis, we had a client from the Ministry of Science or higher education in that field in the what would be the equivalent of a province in Switzerland, and they knew us from TEDx. They knew some of my team from TEDx, and they're like, "Hey, we have this project. Could you guys take that on?" And we're like, "Well, yeah, we surely can." And then we created that company, and we had that first client, and that that kind of reduce the risk drastically to launch a company when you already have a first client.
Right. And so you call yourself a full-service innovation studio. I think of IDEO from San Francisco and worldwide. Is it along the same lines with design thinking?
We look a lot up to IDEO for sure. I think it's something we kind of aspire. We like what they do. And it will be very similar what we offer, obviously on a smaller scale. We're not as big and not everywhere in the world, but similar services, to really, as I said at the beginning, to bring it from design to then implementation and then to continue the implementation. And
describe some of that implementation. Does it get into the brass tacks of branding and marketing communications as well as product development and
it can be all of that if it needs to be, right? If we need to create a new brand, then we will create a new brand. If we need to create a new product, we will create a new product. So that example from that work with UBC, they want to do something. They're not entirely sure, but they know they should do something. They should communicate. So we ask them, before we go into a project, let's see what the user want, who are they, and then we bring the design thinking process, who are they, what they want. We do interviews. We decide, they want to do a documentary would be the best way for you to share your knowledge. So then how are we going to do that documentary, with whom, how are we going to brand it, how are we going to market it, and then we create the product. So we've done that so you can use design thinking for a science communication project, which is a documentary. Or we've done it for like a cider brand. So we've launched a cider brand in Switzerland. What else? We've launched some nonprofit that now manage projects, and we manage the nonprofit. So it depends, you're right. We don't know at first, but people have ideas, and we're like, how can we kind of cultivate those ideas and make sure they don't just die with because of lack of resources, time, and team.
I'm trying to think through because it is so abstract, and you're selling this concept that doesn't exist. How do you approach defining the scope of a project and then putting dollar figure to that, and then getting a firm on board to say, we can fund that? Is it done in like a diagnosis phase and then more of an implementation? Or I'm just curious, from the entrepreneurs listening to this, how do you sell what to some might feel like vapor, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's say that UBC project, they had a budget. They're like, we want to do a science communication project. We don't know what it is yet. We have a budget. What can you do? So that was kind of easy. Like, that's like the best clients because then you keep on fighting. What's your budget? Well, what's your hourly rate? What's your daily rate? And then you go on and on forever, and you lose days and days. And it's so helpful when upfront you're like, hey, what's your budget? This is it. What can you do? That's super helpful. And I actually tend to go like this. I'm like, hey, this is this budget. Or if I have a client that has a budget and we have to do something and hire a subcontractor, I would just tell them right away. But I don't know if it's the best advice, but it's just, I'm actually not even the numbers guy. My business partner, he's the MBA. He brings the number. He makes sure there's return of investment. Right. For me, I'm more like on the creative side, creative journey with the client. So there's tension, but it's a good team to make sure that there's return of investment for the client and for us as a company.
So there's yourself and Alexandra, but
in English it works well.
He's based in Switzerland.
Yeah, that's right.
And so your time must pass somewhere in the morning for you and night for him, I would imagine, when you're communicating?
Yeah, we see each other usually at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m.
Okay.
So it's like kind of evening for him in Switzerland and the morning for me. I often wake up with like tons of WhatsApp messages and emails, but that's just the reality. It's okay. And we work like this. It works quite well. Our company we founded it as, because I worked with him on TEDx. So we knew how to work online and remotely, and also different time, right? So we don't necessarily have to keep hours and stuff like this. There's a good like trust relationship, and that works super well. Yeah.
And we have certified B Corporation.
Yes.
Tell us what that is and why you pursued that for your company.
Yeah. So B Corps are companies that want to make sure that when they make decision, it's not just for profit and the benefit of shareholders. And when they make decision, they have to take into consideration the environment, their client and their worker, and kind of like a community at large. One good example of B Corp is Patagonia. It's kind of always showing Patagonia. And for us as a company, we always wanted to make sure that this was in the ethos of the company, to make sure that we call it positive impact. That's what we wanted to do. Social enterprise, right? Social responsibility. So there's different way to do it. One way is B Corp. There's also, I think, 1% for the planet, or there's all sorts of different labels. We really like the B Corp label. And so when we founded the company, we kind of aim towards that. It took us a long time to do it. It's also like, I think it relates also with ethics, right? I did a lot of work on ethics, and it's like to make sure like you create an ethical company, whatever that means. And often when you think of ethics and business, ethics is often the cherry on the cake. You've done all the work, you're like, oh, what about ethics? Should think about this, right? We talked about some startup, Silicon Valley startup. Ethics sometimes it's the least of their worries, right? It's move fast, break things, and then you deal with ethics. But now things I think are shifting, and B Corp is an example,
And B Corp isn't a once and done. From my understanding, there's a annual reporting involved in your impact and how you're. Am I right with that?
Yeah. There's every 2 years we have to reapply, and it's a very lengthy process. It's very thorough process too. It's very rewarding, I think. But I think when you start a business, it's hard to be like, okay, I want to be a B Corp. Like it's often you to be honest, the least of your worry. You're like, well, I need to make sure like I have clients, make sure that they pay, and I can pay my employees, right? And everything else is kind of becomes secondary. But here, but with B Corp and ethics, you try to like implement as soon as possible, but it's not that easy,
So give us an idea. There's the two partners. Do you have employees as well?
Yeah, we have employees in Canada, a couple in Canada, and 3 or 4 in Switzerland. So and there's like employees that kind of full time, and then we have, a big network now. We have almost 7 years, so we have big network of other companies that we like to work with, if we cannot do it in house, and then other like freelancers and stuff like this.
Right, and so the UBC project, as an example, you mentioned doing a documentary. That's probably not a core in-house capability. You partner with a filmmaker, or
exactly. So and that was in Abbotsford filmmaker Cassier. If you listen, it's a little ad for those guys. So we've done a lot. We've done a lot of video stuff, science communication stuff with video. We didn't do a full length documentary, but we had experience in that kind of field, but we recognized some expertise we were lacking, so we kind of decided to work together.
Talk to me about some of your clients. I feel that many of these are from Switzerland, because I don't totally understand the words. But,
So here's an AI research institute. We lead a hackathon for them every year. This is a 9-day AI hackathon. It's a very lengthy hackathon. Okay. And top researcher in AI. They've been doing AI for 30 years. They've been through winters of AI and winters of AI and winters of AI. But now, so we accompany them doing a hackathon. We would like now to convince them to actually launch a venture studio, because we've done that for 4 or 5 years with them. We're like, oh, there's all this prototype after 9 days. They're very good. What are we going to do? And now we want to pitch to them like, hey, we could do a venture studio. We can help you with it. So that's an example, right? We see the potential, and we as a company, we come along and we're like, we could probably help you guys to do this, help you launch it, help you implement it, help you manage it if you need to, and then accompany you that way. So that's one of the clients. Here, that'll be the example, the Canton du Valais. It's like it'll be like the province of BC. We're still doing now, it's also a 7-year project with the state archives. Archives, you're like, oh, what can I do with all these archives? So they're wanting to digitalize their archives and then see what you can do, create 3D models, imagine Chilliwack, if you could visit Chilliwack in the 1900, 1800, 1300, all based on real data, and what could you do with those data? Could you create video games or other product for tourism and so on? So that's a project we've accompanied them for 6-7 years. So there's a UBC, I already mentioned it. University of Zurich, we do a science communication project with them. They wanted to communicate their research, so we helped them as well. And I think we're doing a comic book this time. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And a Canadian one. I found this in your examples. Edelweiss Village in Golden, BC is the historic home of the pioneering Swiss mountain guides in the Rocky Mountains. And so you were recruited to help with this. Tell me about this project.
Yeah, so that's it's kind of like Canadian and Swiss. It's with the cultural heritage, and that's an old village that was run down. It was going to be sold, and some of people from Switzerland, were really attached to this village because of cultural significance. And so we helped to kind of, I mentioned about Conexkt too, we said we want to imagine new future, innovate, and have positive impact in the community. And that's what we try to do. We're like, well, what could be a new future for this little village instead of being sold, run down, erased from the map? And we suggested to do something about it. We created a foundation to make sure that the historical element can be preserved. And then innovate. So we digitalize actually also with the University of Calgary, the cabins and stuff. So now you can visit the village in a digital form. You could use it for video games or whatever. So again, that part of the history has been preserved. And now we're working closely with there's new owners, a real estate group from Alberta, and they decided to keep the village, to restore it. And we're working with them. The foundation is working with that group to see what we could do with it.
Nice.
So that was a nice little example of, and then again, that my company, we helped with it, and then we're like, well, we should launch a nonprofit, and now the nonprofit is doing the work, right?
I like the images you sent me. They had unique names. The next one was called Failed NFT Project.
Yeah, so that was a
.jpg.
Yeah, that was a failed project in a way. So that was for the village, and we thought to raise fund to save that village, we should do an NFT project. And those were some of the Swiss mountain guides we were selling we wanted to sell them as NFT. We didn't do it because the NFT market was going like this. We're like, we shouldn't do it. So that was a big mistake of timing. And then the users, people interested in cultural heritage, were not knowing or knowledgeable, I'd say, about NFTs, what they are. It's kind of sketchy. I'm not interested. Right. So it didn't work. And then we shifted and we created artwork, and people then we sold a bunch of those different ones, and people have it and bought it and then used that money for the foundation. Yeah, so that worked at the end, but was kind of a failure story.
Cool. I really love did you work with a freelance illustrator for this or?
We had a couple, I think the NFT idea was also from some young entrepreneur from Toronto. They're like, I want to work in the NFT scene. I've seen Edelweiss Village. This could work really well. They did some of the art, and then some friends from UAV, art student, they did this. Even another friend from UAV, she did part of her art project. she did a documentary on Edelweiss Village. So that kind of gave a spotlight to that area. And now the village is part of a national heritage site of Canada. So it's become like a very spotlight for Canadian heritage. So that was pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
The next one is creating a digital clone project. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so that's a better version of me. I don't know. Better, maybe it's enhanced version. People are better online. I don't know. So again, all the AI tools were coming out, right? I mean, we've played with AI for a long time, but with ChatGPT, and then suddenly it's everywhere. So we tested, and we keep testing a lot of AI tools. We're trying to see what can work, what cannot work. It seems we've entered an area where it's a a playground of a sandbox, right? You can test and play with it. So I tried to digital my voice. It was difficult a year ago because of accents and stuff. I think it's getting way better now. Digitized photos and created avatars and so on, podcast and stuff like this. And then that's how like that client, couple clients got interested. They're like, oh, we can do this. Like, can you help us do this? And we're like, yeah, we've tested a lot of things. So that was just by testing. And then, because again, C-level executive, they didn't have time to test all those tools. Like when you're a high school director, you don't have time to go test all the latest AI tool. And we have a team. We're like, okay, let's try this. Let's see what can happen. And we put it out and we put articles about, hey, this is the tool. This is what maybe you should do. We've put out toolkits for ed tech, how to use AI and stuff. And I think, that's got interest from different high schools.
And full circle, you are now the license holder or partner license holder for TEDxAbbotsford. You've done that, I think, 4 or 5 times now. And in this case, this was your most recent in 2023, November. And this is at UFB, the Student Union. How did that event go?
Yeah, so just to back up a little bit, TEDxAbbotsford, my sister-in-law started it. She came visit in Switzerland, and there was TEDxMartigny, and she's like, oh, that's cool. And I'm like, well, maybe, and I would come visit Abbotsford quite a bit, right, see the family. We thought like, hey, Abbotsford seems like a big place. We did a TEDx where there's 15,000. Abbotsford is like 150, 200,000. We're like, I'm sure there's enough people there. There's a university. It seems like a great place to do a TEDx. So that's how she started. Tiffany Beaton, she might have, I think she's been to a couple of TEDx Chilliwack and stuff like this. And then she moved away, and then we've some friends and I, we kind of took over and decided to kind of keep going with it. We had COVID, it was very hard. We shifted on COVID, we had TEDx online. The first one, people were it was novel. So they're like, oh, let's try Zoom. This is something new. And then the second year, I was like, oh man, forget it. A year of Zoom, and you're kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore. So it was great to be back in person. And this year's 50th anniversary of UFV. So I think that maybe there will be something with UFV. I'm not sure yet, but it could be a good venue to share some of those 50 years of UFV on a TEDx stage.
And another thing in Abbotsford that has been founded and is Abbotsford Innovation Network. And I think this has some into the tech district as well. And tell me about this new initiative.
Yeah, so the Abbotsford Innovation Network actually hosts TEDx Abbotsford. So it's it's kind of the non-profit that hosts TEDx Abbotsford. And Gavin and John, I think they've come here too, right? So,
Colin did a recruiting, and this has been our last 3 guests.
I think he did a good job recruiting all those guys. Yeah, so it's kind of connected with the Abbotsford Tech District, but not necessarily. The Abbotsford Tech District is a real estate project.
Right.
The Abbotsford Innovation Network is kind of the Chilliwack Innovation Network. It's putting entrepreneurs together and see what can happen, right?
And is the city involved at all, or do you have their blessing essentially? Or are you working on it?
Man.
Have I touched on it? A difficult.
I'm like, there's things I can say afterwards when we have.
Fair enough.
No, I think no. Like, to be honest, the city is probably excited about it. We haven't. A couple of people have talked to us. They think it's a good idea. They've come. I think they've come to some of our events. But it's not. Let's say it's not for the city, right? It's for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you launch something, like shared resources amongst entrepreneurs are huge things, right? Simple example, like if you have a license for software, if you can share, the price get cut, right? And all those things count when you start a business. So that's and then sharing skills and meeting like-minded people, entrepreneur, creatives. So that's some of the ideas. Because a lot of people in Abbotsford have tech companies. They work with their clients are everywhere else in the world than Abbotsford, but they are not connected. I think here in Chilliwack, you guys do a good job to connect those people. In Abbotsford, you see them in a couple of cafes. There's like solo entrepreneurs and stuff, and we're like, well, let's bring these people together under the same roof and see what are the projects that could happen. I think one difference Chilliwack Abbotsford is Abbotsford. It's my my 2 cents analysis. It's often I think it will look up to Vancouver. Like if we want to do tech, let's look to Vancouver.
Right.
Why bother doing it here, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit of inferiority, maybe complex. And we're like that, like, listen, guys, there's enough talent right here. Even as UFV, you can train a lot of talents, and you want to avoid brain drain, people leaving. Like, let's keep them here. So that's the network this is a network of people. And then the Abbotsford Tech District will be
Right.
I mean, if you want to host, if you want to have buildings, this could be the place
Got it.
that we could do. Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, I
Yeah.
sure appreciate you coming out. I know that we said we'd keep it to an hour. You've got another event to be at, but let's
Yeah.
hear it for Johann.
Thank you. Thanks.
We're at 6:13 right now. Can we do 2 questions from the audience?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Let's do it.
For coming out and making the drive from Abbotsford with a pending snowstorm. Much appreciated. My question is, on the verge of AI, and consultants is a gig that lots of people are writing that it's threatening consultants more than anyone else, especially when the creativity seems to be coming out of AI, perhaps even as strongly as its coding abilities. So, as you look at your business, how do you plan to capitalize on it within your business as opposed to just for your own clients?
Yeah, I mean, we use AI like every day. Like every day I'm like capping the GPT limits. I'm like, oh man, again, it's only 9 a.m. Yeah, so I mean, we use it for like sounding boards to like help us write proposal, emails, like you name it. It's I think that's super helpful. And then our clients, again, yeah, they could also do it, but a lot of people don't have time. That's what I say, like C-level executive, they just don't have time. If you run a university or whatever, you don't have time to go and test all those tools. So we could, then we help them with it. And then somehow you become an expert on ChatGPT because you've used it since it was GPT-2. So that's kind of very simple, right? So yeah, so I don't think, I think it helped us improve actually quite a bit. We're like consultant, we're like maybe at this level, and now you're like, yeah, you can keep on improving and be better. So that's very exciting, and it also helped people that maybe have people that are dyslexic, they have a harder time to read and understand things, but then it's like, well, I could use this to even like do better job, and that's great, I think. Yeah.
One more question. We've got Joe here.
How does your work in ethics? Your thesis was in ethics, and human or advancement. How does that currently inform your current business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's always in the kind of back of my mind to reflect on ethics and tech, and to think about those things. Yeah, of like what are the ethical implication of this new technology? Like, is there inequalities that's gonna come? That's gonna be more prominent? Is it gonna affect the autonomy of people, like or their ability to decide? Is there risk involved? Stuff like this. Is it tech for good? And how do you think through those things? So that informs a lot that way. And also being a B Corp, I think it's you kind of take some sort of ethical or sustainable stance. And then it seems you attract only certain type of client. And then, so you'll have to say no to some client for maybe because it doesn't align with it. Yeah. So, but it's an ongoing discussion, ethics and tech, right? So you can reflect on it, and we also test to then understand it better. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your launch story with us and coming on out. So,
Thank you. Thanks for having me.